So this is another information episode. We are looking at remote viewing, and Peter McDonald is with us again. And here we go. All right, Space Cab. So here we go. This is an important lesson in remote viewing.
The subject today.
Correct. I'm going to let Peter take this part.
Okay, well, Space Cab has become interested in the concept of remote viewing. Remote viewing, Wikipedia defines remote viewing as the practice of seeking impressions about a distant or unseen subject, purportedly sensing with the mind. So basically, it's a form of clairvoyance. But what we're talking about as remote viewing is something that was a project that was initiated by the American military in the early 70s. They were afraid that, it was the tail end of the Cold War, and they thought that the Russians were trying to use people's psychic abilities to spy on the U.S. And in defense, they decided to do some research on their own and started putting resources into studying people's psychic abilities. And the one that they were interested in our case, was called remote viewing. And remote viewing is a form of clairvoyance that's been used for a long time in different shamanic traditions. For instance, I've heard a story personally that this guy's father could beat on his drum when he was an old man, and he would beat on his drum and go into a trance, and he could travel around their hunting territory, which was, hundreds and hundreds of square miles in his mind. And then he could tell his sons where to go to find the deer, and he would give instructions like, you'll go up to the top of a hill and there'll be a rock, but it's not that rock. Look across to another hill and there's another rock over there, and you go to that rock. So this is like remote viewing, but it's not what we're necessarily talking about. We're talking about like the American trying to quantify remote viewing to possibly use as a weapon. But there's another normal sort of use of the same concept, which is police have been using psychics to try and solve cases for many years. The Stanford Institute, it's a non-profit research institute, and it started off early as a branch of Stanford University. Eventually it broke from them, and it just became a Stanford Research Institute International. Okay, so back in the olden days, Parapsychology Foundation and the Institute of Noetic Science, which was, its acronym is IONS, IONS, and it was founded by Edgar Mitchell.
Okay.
It was co-founded by Edgar Mitchell, who was he was the sixth person to walk on the moon.
So exciting.
So, yeah. And so these guys were hired, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, who had been hired by the SRI, were doing work for these other two groups on out-of-body experiences. And they were testing people. There's a few different tests they were doing, but they're just trying to, some of the tests were just like tests for people's psychic abilities. Yeah. But one of them was to try and test people like on how they could go out of their body and have experiences, like sort of like astral projection or something like that. But I'm not sure. It doesn't specifically say astral projection, but I know astral projection is one way of looking at it anyway, like where you're going out of your body. And so you go from a certain standpoint and you can look from that point, and when you're astral projecting, and you can see things from that point of view. So the Defense Department had heard about the experiments that were going on at the Stanford Research Institute, because one of the subjects of the experiments was becoming a celebrity. His name was Uri Geller. And at some of his experiments at SRI, he was trying to basically copy simple drawings that were on the other side of a wall in another room. And he became quite, he was pretty good at this.
Successful.
But he was also an entertainer. He was like a magician. He had a stage show of using his psychic powers.
At the same time?
Yeah. Using his psychic powers. So anyway, the Defense Department heard about him, and they wanted to get in on if he did have any powers or not. And they were interested in not just remote viewing, but also telekinesis, psychokinesis, yes. Like moving things in the world with your mind.
With your mind.
But anyway, he sort of became famous, and there's a funny story that, like, someone claims that they saw him teleport a dog through a wall.
That's upsetting to me.
Now, I don't know if I believe.
Mostly because of the poor animal,
but you did have another story about Uri Geller.
True that, kids, and I bet you've heard this name as well, which is the late great John Lennon, and they were friends, Uri and John. I'll tell the first story, and it's something that I've heard from, I believe, also a late great on the Art Bell show. But anyway, so they were talking about what they knew of Uri, and so the story of John Lennon. So, okay, John and Yoko, one night, John wakes up to banging at the apartment door, so he goes out. Yoko will not wake up. He goes to the door and opens it, and there before him are insectoids. And he becomes alarmed. They want to come in. He says, no, I'm not certain if he tries to punch, but he slams the door to them and goes back to bed. The other details I'm
connected to Uri Geller.
To Uri. So Uri, okay, here we go. So years later, still with John carried with him since all his Beatle days as a youngster gentleman, a golden egg, which it was like a lucky charm. And he gives it to Uri, and it has in part to do with his, let's just say, ET experiences, and he is terrified, and he says, you have to take this now. And Uri never lets John know that he feels that it wasn't a magic egg. And that likely it was made in,
China or whatever.
Correct.
Well, so that's a good story.
It's a reasonable story.
I like the ending of it. It's kind of funny. So anyway, the Defense Department heard about the experiments at SRI. And so they started, let's say they just started a program that eventually became something called Stargate. And Stargate was like, there were a bunch of different programs going on at the same time. What was the one about gondola? I forget any.
Yes, they all have great names. That was
one was called Sandgate. Anyway, all these programs eventually came under one umbrella of this project Stargate. But Stargate was focused mainly on remote viewing, And there's a funny character connected to Stargate. Like,
Yes.
his name is Albert Stubblebine, and he's sort of like thinly portrayed in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats. And he was a totally enthusiastic about people's psychic abilities. And one of his
he was leading his little group, was he not?
Well, he wasn't. He was overseeing. One of his advisors was overseeing Stargate,
right?
And his advisor, I don't know his name, but he's been referred to as a psychic headhunter. He was the one who found all the psychic people.
Sexy naughty talk.
Yeah. So so one of the things that Stubblebine tried to do is he thought you could walk through walls, and he tried it on a number of occasions, all unsuccessfully. But he also demanded that everyone on his staff could bend keys or bend spoons,
yes,
like Uri Geller by rubbing the side of
no.
But in the remote. So have we said everything about Uri? Yeah, basically. I mean, he comes back into it later because he has. We want to go on to this person, Ingo Swann, because he was one of the most successful people in the remote viewing experiments. But he was sort of overshadowed by Uri Geller. Partly because Uri Geller was, a lot of people thought he was a charlatan. Mm-hmm. And anyway, Ingo's had way more success in remote viewing, and sort of like the remote viewing as we know it now sort of comes from, he's sort of like the godfather of remote viewing, like the originator of, I mean, some people say that he coined the phrase remote viewing. Yes. But he said that he got it from a French guy in the early 20s who was a book that he read. But anyway, so our next topic of discussion will be Ingo Swann.
Ingo Swann, the fancy, wonderful Ingo Swann.
Okay, so this section is about a gifted individual called Ingo Swann. And in the experiments at SRI, he'd been very successful. And this can be borne out by the fact that outside of the experiments that were done with him, he was employed by the Army as a remote viewer for 21 years. So that's outside of, so whether or not they're skeptical or they're willing to back research in remote viewing, they still hired Ingo Swann for 21 years to do whatever it is that he does. So, I mean, so Ingo had been doing a lot of experiments with Puthoff and Targ at the SRI, but he got bored. He said that it wasn't helpful in exercising his ability to just keep trying to see what's on a shelf in another room.
Correct.
And he was bored, so he thought. He suggested that they look much, much further away.
Way further off planet, kids. Let's go to Jupiter because... Oh, and before he said he became so bored and it was flatlining. It was about to flatline his abilities. And he actually went to them and said, "You can have your money back," and I quit. And I am doing this. And he did. So what he did do was remote view Jupiter.
But he did it under theirs or just on his own?
I think he does it on his own. We might have to revisit that, kids. I'm not 100% sure, but he in any case, what happened is and NASA was to send up their
the Voyager spacecraft, right?
Which comes with that special word,
probe. No, yeah. So some of the things that he saw when he tried to view Saturn Jupiter remotely were only verified when the Voyager probe flew past.
And then they
Jupiter.
look at the probe's evidence. What do you call it? Gosh.
Yes, just the things that they seen. You called them.
The markers. Yes,
the markers.
yes. No.
But so there's a number of things that he's seen, which Eli is going to point out a couple of them that he saw.
Yeah, the existence of the hydrogen mantle, which was later confirmed in 73 and then in 75. Windstorms confirmed 76. They said so. Something like a tornado was also later, after NASA even gets to see anything. Sorry, yes, right. Ingo Swann, 2 ends. Okay, so Ingo, that was his point. So, and all of these things get confirmed. Cloud color, temperature inversion, infrared readings, crystal bands, rings, we could call them.
Right, like the rings around Saturn.
Yeah,
that have been seen.
Yes.
So all these things were seen remotely by Ingo, and then confirmed later when the results came back from the Voyager probe,
and
they took pictures and did other kinds of
and then
metrics.
They analyze it.
Yeah, so he was. Let's just say he was good at it. So
and he looked very fine in a cowboy hat. He was a character, shall we say?
He sometimes wore a cowboy hat, but he always smoked cigars.
Yes.
He smoked small cigars. And there are testimonies of people seeing him when he's in a state of remote viewing. Like when you're doing remote viewing, you need what's called a monitor, and the monitor sits with you and takes note of what you're seeing and possibly directs. But I mean, in a real remote viewing experiment, there would be, they would make certain that the monitor wasn't giving any clues to the remote viewer about what was being.
Oh, that's important.
And another factor in remote viewing is that the people who are doing remote viewing are never told whether or not their remote viewing has been successful.
Right. And why?
Well, because they feel like if they think that a failure would detract from their ability to see things remotely. So that's just another little sidebar.
And then later, the good Ingo back to Ingo.
Yeah.
And he receives a phone call one day. And it's a woman on the line. She says, "Mr. Swann, can you be at this location at this time? And we have a job for you." And then hang up. And then he goes to, I believe it's like a train station. It's a public place. He is met up by 2, he calls them the twins. They're handsome military men. Oh, gosh. So they tell him, they are going to take him and go to their boss.
Okay. Take me to your leader.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Mr. Axelrod. So they have to also, during the journey, they're going to cover his head with, your standard issue black hood.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time, and they get him there. They put him in a room. In comes Axelrod. His head hood is removed. So Mr. Axelrod explains that they are going to pay him weekly. And they have a job for him to do, to remote view. And he's to sleep there. They're going to give him, he gets to stay on this facility. And he's fed and silly stuff. And Mr. Axelrod's like, please feel free to use the gym. And it wasn't really Ingo's thing, but he felt like, okay, so I'll go to the gym. And of course, the twins are in there doing all kinds of things. They're athletic, and Ingo is not. And so he does some sillies and goes back and then is met up by Axelrod. We're going to fast forward. I think it's the next day. Axelrod is his monitor and gives him coordinates.
To view.
Like
geographical coordinates. And he's supposed
Correct.
to see what's going on.
Oh, yes. And maybe I should say this too. So Ingo, just to go back to Jupiter, friends, in the protocols, you have to be given coordinates. You're given essentially numbers.
Okay, and when you say coordinates, you're talking about rules for how remote viewing is done that people have to follow. If you're talking about when you say protocols, like, because you just said in the protocol. So the
Yes.
protocols are like when you're remote viewing, there's certain procedures, let's say, that you have to follow. Either, I don't know how it works, like maybe psychically or whatever, but
no, it's even more strict than that. You have to actually, it's very, you have to, gosh, okay, so your monitor reads out your coordinates. Immediately after, and as long as it takes to say Enneagram, your pen makes a squiggle. Let's just call it a scribble. And pen needs to stay on paper. You often people meditate before they begin. Some.
Okay, you're talking about protocols now.
Protocols. So you have to, because what it is an impression in your mind. If it is, as soon as you start to think about that impression, it's wrongful. So you just, and there are lists of, taste, sounds, textures.
I see.
Blah, blah,
These
blah.
are the things you're supposed to attend to while you're in the state of remote viewing.
Correct.
Okay.
And it is a very quick process, because if you begin to start to think, that means your mind's already turning it into something. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so in order to get, we got to go off planet. We need a coordinate.
Right. Axelrod says this to him as his monitor.
No, this is previous this is Ingo on his own.
Oh, I see.
Getting to Jupiter. So he does that by I'm going to lose, so you can figure out where Jupiter is.
I see.
With numbers.
There's coordinates.
Yes, coordinates.
Some kind of universal coordinates.
Correct.
And so he looked at those coordinates. That's where he went in his mind. Is that?
Yeah.
Or in his psychic.
Correct.
Okay. So
we're back. Okay.
No, I'm just saying.
Fine.
So you were back to the twins. You were talking about the twins.
And they're in the gym. They're having a great time.
I know. But okay. Besides that, so he says. So this is Axelrod who tells him to go to Jupiter. Is that what you're talking about? Or?
Negative. That's
okay.
No.
So where's the Axelrod?
All right. So here we are. We're going to move it along now. I'm sorry, Peter, and I messed around with the story. So Axelrod gives him his coordinates. They're going to the moon.
Okay. Yeah.
The moon. So what he finds, wow, is it great? Oh, it's so incredibly great and strange. Your monitor stays with you. So it's Axelrod and Ingo in a room together. And Ingo is telling him what he's seeing and finding. And he says there are beings, and they seem to be digging, confused, and suddenly he is aware that the beings are aware that he is seeing them.
Well, that fits in with, that's spooky. But Axelrod then says to him, "Get out."
Yes. Yes, you're right, Peter. Oh my gosh, that's right. So he says, "Get out, get out."
Which sort of
because Ingo says to him, they see me, they know I'm there. He says, "I think they know I'm there," and he's like, "Get out, get out, get out, get out." Oh my gosh.
Okay,
And so good golly, he does.
Come over
No,
closer
that's
to
great.
one of the things that Ingo says is that he believes in extraterrestrials, and he thinks that they're like humanoid. They take a humanoid form. But he also says that he thinks that the psychics are their only enemies,
Yes.
because psychics can see them. So anyway, that's just
because that's their great trick,
just
kids.
sort of like,
is it not, Peter? I mean, is that is as far as people?
Well, that's his. That's
no.
Yeah.
I mean, in the ufology greater community, including people who have been abducted and spoken about it, it's mind to mind, and they read your mind, yes, and they can talk into your head.
That's a theory, but anyway, so another thing that they found,
okay,
when they were on the moon,
all right,
is they found that he saw. Didn't he see something about that the moon was like hollow?
Oh yes.
Like that?
Oh.
And it's
crazy. Not only is it okay, yes. And actually we all know now that I don't know who it was, but they have heard it ring like a bell. Yeah. But this is beyond belief, kids. This is the money. The moon, 5.3 billion years old, less compact, much older than the 2.2, and there's a discrepancy of 2 billion years. So if
the moon is older than the Earth, is what you're trying to say.
Way older.
Yeah, much older, billions of years older than the Earth.
And the thing about compression is, it has to do with the fact that it is hollow.
Well, I've also heard that that it's a spaceship, that the moon is actually a spaceship, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in orbit around the Earth.
Carl Sagan says it's frightening. He said frightening.
Okay.
Because that means it is not a natural satellite.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, that kind of thing is like, it hasn't been confirmed by any probes yet.
Because a probe is always
no. I'm saying, okay, so Ingo was right about Jupiter, and so I mean, we can sort of assume that he may have been right about the moon too.
No, so but it's already been known somewhat that the moon is hollow, because it did ring like a bell.
I think that was a quote from an astronaut or something like that, but I'm not sure.
For over a day. Did it not? It rang like a bell.
I can't. Maybe it was like
they know it's
from
hollow.
The impact of
not only that, kids. I'm going to fast
on
track this.
Okay.
The native remember they speak about a time before the moon was there.
Okay, that I've never heard that myth. I don't know. But the thing is, how would, if you figured out the density of the moon versus the density of the Earth, or versus the Earth, how much magnetic attraction would it need to stay in orbit around the Earth?
It was even more than that. It was also the fact that if the moon was properly our moon, it would contain similar
substance or like composition,
and yet it doesn't.
Earth. Okay.
And where are those 2 billion years? Where did they go, Peter? Professor?
Well, that's when, the Earth was like going around some other planet. Possibly the moon was going around Mars back then, or something.
What it appears to me is the moon basically drove here.
Yeah, okay.
And for reasons. What are the reasons?
I don't know, but I mean, let's say it's some alien race that's running the moon.
Forget about it, kids. People know that nowadays there are things on the moon. NASA, bless them, have only decided to become more transparent now. Thank you, David Grush. Okay, this is another fascinating thing. Back to Ingo and NASA.
Okay.
In penetration, an excellent read. We didn't mention
In
this.
Penetration, which is Ingo's biography.
No, it's not a biography. Is
It's not a biography.
Well, I mean,
didn't he write it though?
Yes, and he was advised not to.
But I mean, it does tell about his life, so I think
certainly,
it's autobiographical.
He's an excellent writer, friends. Just thinking.
He's also a painter, by the way.
Wonderful painter.
Ingo Swann, yeah.
Peter showed me that.
No longer
alive anymore. I've forgotten.
So to go back to remote viewing, let's say people still are interested in remote viewing today.
You can take a course, kids.
And if you want to do some further research on remote viewing, there's a great website called Remotely Viewed, and there are many interviews with people who were associated with with the Stanford Research Institute and Project Stargate, and he interviews the host of the website interviews people who were involved in remote viewing at that time in Stargate, which is basically Stargate sort of ended. The CIA withdrew its funding in 1991, and it kept going until 1995. And there's a good interview on Remotely Viewed of the person who was head of Stargate in the time after the CIA left. He'd been working there before, but he became the head of it. His name is David May, and there's a good interview with him on there. But also, so we didn't really talk about this, but another thing that they were doing was they were trying to figure out how to teach. We talked about it a little bit, how to teach people to increase their psychic abilities.
I found this hard to understand.
Well,
because I felt like, are you saying, okay, why don't you explain it a little bit?
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, Ingo was one of the proponents who said everybody has this sort of potential for having this psychic power to see far away, but and he believed that he could teach people how to do it. But out of that, and it was partly from the research, they developed a technique in Stargate to try and teach people how to have better psychic abilities. I've heard that, like, so when Ingo was remote viewing, they hooked up polygraph to him, like measuring his brain waves, and purportedly, I'll say, if you could produce those same brain waves in anybody, they have a better ability. It increases their ability to remote view. I don't have any evidence that that's ever been done, but that's something that someone put forward. But there are also now many different
you can pay all
commercial
money.
Commercial things that teach people how to remote view for their own, like how to see what the winning lottery numbers are in the future or whatever. I mean, it's a little bit more of a monetized thing. But okay, so here's my little story, which connects in.
This is going to be the best bit.
No, is that when I was in grade 8, I was chosen from my school to go to CBC radio studios in Toronto to be on this show called Catch the 203. And it was hosted by a famous, a lot of people, older people will recognize his name, Warren Davis. It was hosted by him. And while we were there, Jan Tennant walked into the studio. There's another former CBC personality. And so I met her. And, but I got into conversation. So the host, the guest on 203 was, or the premise of 203, Catch the 203, was a bunch of public school kids could interview somebody on the air. And the guest that we were interviewing, his name was Dr. Carlos Osis. And he was head of the American Society for Psychical Research. And through questioning, I found out that they were using something which he called an ESPA teacher, like ESP, ESPA teacher, to try and teach people to see, like, I mean, those cards, those cards that they have with different, like, so there's a waves, there's a circle. I know one of the astronauts was trying to do that while he was in space. Wow. He was trying to, while the other guys were walking on the moon, he was trying to project, like, trying to psychically project images of cards that he was looking at to somebody back on Earth, actually.
From
he was circling the moon. Yes, right. He was trying to. But anyway, so Carlos, his name is Carlos Osis, and the ESPA teacher. I just feel like it was a coincidental that I had this experience, and I knew who Carlos Osis was, and I looked up in the proceedings of the American American Parapsychology.
Oh gosh.
ASPR, the American Psychic. Anyway.
Yes.
ASPR.
Research.
Yes, the American Psychic Research Parapsychological Research Association.
Done.
And I think like because we're doing this now that it's just a weird coincidence that like I'm talking to somebody who's performing these experiments at the SRI when I was back in public school.
So sorry, Osis?
Osis, yeah, OSIS, Carlos Osis.
Yes,
and American Parapsychological.
But he
Research
had a connection to Stanford Research Institute.
Well, because you see, the Stanford Research Institute is a private research institute, and they have a bunch of different abilities that, like, defense contractors or private commercial things can ask them to do research on stuff.
Right.
And those two guys. Putoff and Targ were working for them, and the American Society for Psychical Research, was paying SRI to do research on psychic phenomena and people's psychic abilities.
Okay.
So that's my little story, which is probably completely garbled, but it can all be totally.
No, I think it's all beautifully done. Okay, so thanks to Peter, and that was fascinating. And I'm still only halfway through Ingo's utterly fascinating, sorry to use the word again, book Penetration, and I'm pretty sure we will be having a entirely Ingo Swann episode. See you next week. Thanks, Space Cab.